Good evening, everyone. I'm Nicole Passini, Deputy Director of Glendale Library Arts and Culture. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that I'm presently located in Glendale, California, which is on the traditional lands of the Tongva people, and I also wish to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their 5,000-year-plus culture of learning. On behalf of all the public libraries in Los Angeles and Ventura counties, thank you for joining the Southern California Library Cooperative and my library for this conversation with David Heska Wanbli Weiden and Marcie Rendon. This event is part of our series, Be the Change, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism. Be the Change events build collective understanding of systemic racism, elevate the voices and stories of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and inspire our communities to be the change. This series is generously supported by the City of Glendale Arts and Culture Commission, Outlook Newspapers, and Niche Academy, which is graciously hosting us on their platform tonight. You can find more Be the Change events and information at glac.info/bethechange. We're currently featuring the online exhibit Nowhere and Everywhere in our Reflect Space virtual gallery. It presents a visual exploration of the ways Native Americans are represented and misrepresented through popular culture, while creating a counterpoint to this imagery through humanistic photography by Native artists. You can access the gallery at reflectspace.org or on the Be the Change website. Tonight, in honor of Native American Heritage Month, we're pleased to be hosting David Heska Wanbli Weiden in conversation with Marcie Rendon. David Heska Wanbli Weiden is an enrolled member of the Sicangu Lakota Nation and winner of the 2020 Spur Award from the Western Writers of America. He'll be talking about his new critically acclaimed mystery novel, Winter Counts. The Los Angeles Times recently listed Winter Counts in their annual gift guide, so make sure you head over to Once Upon a Time bookstore and to order a signed copy for the mystery reader in your life. And Mr. Weiden will be in conversation with Edgar Award nominee Marcie Rendon, who's an enrolled member of the White Earth Nation. Marcie is an author, playwright, poet, and freelance writer, and was recently named a Distinguished Artist by the McKnight Foundation. This month, she was featured on Oprah Magazine's list of the best Native American authors to read right now, and Once Upon a Time has her books available as well. I'm going to turn the floor over to David and Marcie now for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you again to Glendale Library and everybody for hosting us. And Marcie, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, great to see you. I really enjoyed your book.
Oh, thank you. And I enjoyed yours as well. I know you've written a bunch, but I told you this right before we started. I've written a little bit about your books, and indeed, I just wrote a little feature for the Millions Year in Reading, and I mentioned you, and I mentioned you as well. So thank you so much for joining me, Marcie. It's really my honor.
So I mean, what Nicole said about the Spur Award, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. I got, I think Murder on the Red River was a nominee or a finalist for Best Contemporary Spur Award. So that's kind of cool that you got that. That's great.
This was for my children's book, which is Spotted Tail. So
okay.
about a year ago, I published a book called Spotted Tail. It's a picture book for 5-year-old to 10-year-olds about the great leader of the Sicangu Lakota Nation, and it was published by Raycraft Books. And yeah, I'm really honored that the Western Writers of America gave it the Spur Award. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah. So tell us about Winter Counts.
Well, I'm happy to. So Winter Counts, I'll hold it up here for everyone. So Winter Counts is my debut novel, I guess. It was released August 25th from Echo HarperCollins. And today, in fact, it was just named one of the 9 best crime novels of the year by Library Journal. I was deeply honored by that. It was listed as on the top 100 books of the year by Amazon, and also one of the, the best books of the year by Publishers Weekly. So I'm just, and also a New York Times Editor's Choice. So I'm just very, very grateful that people are responding to it. So for those that haven't read it, I'll start off by telling a little bit about Winter Counts. Winter Counts is set on the Rosebud Indian Reservation, which is where my people are from in South Dakota. And my mother grew up there. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, but I spent much of my youth on the reservation. And so it is the story of Virgil Wounded Horse, who is a hired vigilante. And so the book really revolves around the issue of the broken criminal justice system on Native American reservations. There is a federal law called the Major Crimes Act. And the Major Crimes Act, it holds that that Native nations cannot prosecute felony crimes that occur on their own lands. Instead, when a felony crime is committed, tribal police have to call up the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office and hand the offender over to the federal authorities to prosecute. Now, you know, that is problematic because it goes against our sovereignty as independent Native nations, but it gets even worse. Federal authorities are failing to prosecute about 30 to 40% of all felony crimes. So they just say, we're not going to prosecute this. And so the offender is released and is free to offend again. And this is problematic. This is why we have an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women on Native reservations. We have too much crime on reservations, and it's all due to this really terrible law that was enacted way back in 1885, but is still the law of the land. So what people are doing on some reservations, I can't speak for all, is they hire a private vigilante to get justice. If the feds won't prosecute the person who hurt a child or your sister or your mother, then maybe you hire a vigilante who will go out there and put the hurt on somebody for money. And so the book is the story of one of these vigilantes, Virgil Wounded Horse, and it's also his struggle to come to terms with his Lakota identity. So I think I've said enough to kind of set up the book.
Cool, cool. And so what is your, I mean, you wrote the story, obviously, but what is your personal feeling about the vigilante justice that occurred?
You know, I'm troubled by vigilante justice because I don't think it's the right answer, usually. I mean, if I live outside of Denver, Colorado, and if a crime were to occur, you know, I want to call the police, and I have hopefully a reasonable belief that they will pursue the crime, and if they catch the offender, prosecute him or her. So that's the way it should be. But on the other hand, if the feds are failing to hold up their part of the bargain, if they're not prosecuting these crimes, then I think it's a more difficult question. Then I think vigilante justice becomes more understandable. I'm not saying it's correct, but if somebody hurt my child, I've got two boys, 16 and 13, and if somebody hurt them and the police wouldn't do anything, I would be mightily tempted to get some extrajudicial justice. So that's my feeling.
And in this, how old is Virgil?
Well, you know, I don't really say in the book, you know, and I want to say maybe 40-ish. I've often kind of wondered about that. I never actually give his age. And so
he has a nephew who's in junior high.
He looks after his nephew who's 14.
14.
So there you go.
Yeah. Could be anywhere between 20 to 40. You're right.
You know, I'd say at least 35 to 45. I'd say somewhere in that range. I never really figured it out how old he is. And you know, we promised a conversation here. And so if folks don't know, I've been a big fan of Marcie Rendon for a long time because she's written a wonderful series of books involving Cash Black Bear, who is a wonderful, wonderful protagonist, and Girl Gone Missing. That's the title, right? Of number 2, is that right? I loved it. I've raved about it in print. And if you don't know, it's a wonderful page turner, and she's just a fantastic protagonist. And do you mind me asking you? I mean, I know this is supposed to be me talking here, but I want to ask you a few things. Are you writing another Cash story, if you don't mind me asking?
So yes, um, book 3 is the rough draft is written, and I'm, I've got rewrites, I've got other stuff I got to do with it, and I started the beginning of book 4. Um, Cash lives on, and I know that
Nice.
people are anxiously awaiting book 3, but it's just taken it has taken longer than what I had anticipated.
I see. I see. And she's what in the book? Is she like 25, 28, something like that? She's in college, right?
19.
She's 19. Okay, so I was way off. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in yeah, she's just barely 19. She is in her first year at college, or she was in Girl Gone Missing. Um, and she's not I mean, both of our characters, they're not, what do you call that? They're not legal cops or detectives or private eyes. They're individuals who somehow help solve crimes or solve the situation in your case. And Cash, she was befriended by the county cop, and she has intuitive powers that help help him solve crimes that happen.
Well, I'm thrilled that there's going to be a third book in the series because I really loved Girl Gone Missing. And Marcie brings up an interesting point here, is that there's sort of a new wave of crime novelists of color, not just Native folks, but all different folks, ethnicities of color are writing sort of a new type of crime fiction. And I think you've kind of put your finger on it, is that we're not all writing police procedurals, as they're called. We're not all writing something from the viewpoint of a police officer or a private investigator. Now some folks are, but a lot of us, I have a good friend, Sean Cosby, he wrote a wonderful book called Blacktop Wasteland,
Yeah.
and it's about a bug montage who's a criminal who's pulled back. He tries to go straight, but he's pulled back into the life of crime one more time. So a lot of us are, to use an academic term, we're decentering crime fiction and writing it from, I would say, different viewpoints to try and open up the world of crime fiction. So that's
Cool.
just one point that I had here.
I have a question about how did you come up with your character? That's one question somebody always asks me. Where did your guy?
I came up with the character of Virgil Wounded Horse because I knew that this was a real thing on my reservation. And so I knew for a fact that there were folks that you could hire to beat somebody up for money. And I'd known about this for a while. In my day job, I'm a professor of Native American Studies. So I teach more academic stuff, but I travel back to my reservation and I visit family, I take part in spiritual ceremonies, and I would hear these stories about these vigilantes. And the idea just stuck in my head. It's like, wow, what
Yeah.
what what sort of a job is that? I have this nice job where I sit in a classroom and I talk to young students, but what sort of a job is it to go out and beat people up for a living? And so I got this idea about 10 years ago, and I wrote a short story in 2010. I published it in 2014 in the journal Yellow Medicine Review, and I thought I was done with this particular character, Virgil Wounded Horse, but he stuck with me, and I kept thinking, there's more that I need to do with him. So about 2017, I said, I need to see if I can expand him and expand his world. So to answer your question, he came to me from real life. Was that the same with Cash Black Bear? I'll throw it back onto you.
No. I mean, she just sort of appeared, and I had given up writing crime. I thought it just wasn't going to happen. And so I'd switched to writing just some kind of fluff piece, and Cash appeared and said, no. And as long as I was writing the story that was, coming in my head, I could tell that it was working. So yeah, and people ask if she's, you know, if the story's autobiographical, if she's modeled after somebody, but she's not. I mean, and what's fascinating to me as the writer, as the creator of this character, is that so many people, so many Native women say that they can see themselves in her, you know, that she, you know, like I'm writing their story, which, you know, I wasn't, you know, and maybe this is true for you too. Like there is so much cultural and legal and historical background in your story. I don't know if you were intending to write that. Like for me, I was just intending to write a good crime story. That's what I was going to try to do. I didn't have the, you know, intention to have it be something else.
I did put in a lot of legal stuff in there, but I tried to not throw in too much. I didn't want to write just a dry textbook or a lecture that nobody cared about.
Right.
So I
Right.
always put the story first. But my experience has been when I, you know, as a teacher of Native American studies, I find that most people, even a lot of Native folks, they don't know about the Major Crimes Act. They don't know that there's this horrifying thing that goes on in reservations, that felony crimes are not being prosecuted. So I did want to put that in there. I wanted to put a little bit about IHS. I know we talked about this a few weeks ago. We natives, we know, I don't know up north how IHS is with you guys, but it's not viewed. If you don't know, folks, I'm sorry, people that are watching, IHS is the Indian Health Service, and it's where we get our health care. So part of the bargain that was made between the United States and Native nations is the United States got the continent, we got these little pockets of land that supposedly were ours forever, and we got free healthcare forever. That was part of the bargain. So it's not a handout. However, the United States is not really holding up its part of the bargain, in my view, because the healthcare we get is often substandard. On my hospital on the Rosebud Reservation, they shut it down for a couple of years. It was dirty. The care was so bad. A woman that was pregnant, she came in, she gave birth in the bathroom at the hospital, horrifying. And so they shut it down. And so I put in a little bit about the bad health care that we often get. I think a lot of people don't know that, at least on my reservation, a lot of our folks don't have running water or electricity or heat.
Yeah.
And so a woman on my reservation froze to death about 3 years ago. She couldn't afford her propane delivery. And so they found her rock solid. It was a tragedy. And so that's in the book as well, although with a child.
Right,
So I did throw in, yeah, a lot of, I suppose, legal and political background that kind of comes from my day job as a professor. But I hope I didn't overwhelm folks with it. I hope I kept the story
no,
going.
not at all. It flowed with the story. But what I found is that we are writing from a worldview that's our worldview. And it's like you said, not most people know nothing about the legal situation that Native people, that we have a totally different legal relationship with, you know, local government, state government, federal government, and then that Major Crimes Act. You know, it's like most people don't know about this. So we're just writing what we know, and people stumble into reading it, you know, and they're like, oh, what is this?
Yeah, I threw in, you know, there was stuff that I took out because I felt that the book was getting to be just too stuffed with legal and political issues. So I did take a lot out. Folks may not know this, but until 1978, Native spirituality was outlawed. It was criminalized in the United States. So if we practice our spirituality, that was actually a Class A felony, and we could be arrested. And it was actually enforced in the earlier part of the century. And so my students, when I teach, are always stunned to learn that Native religion was outlawed. It was a criminal offense until the year 1978. And my students always say, well, gosh, Professor Weiden, what about the First Amendment? And I tell them, it's like, look, unfortunately, the Constitution is not always applied fairly or equally. And they're just, you can just see their heads exploding. But I had to take that out because I wanted to write, like you were saying, a great crime story and not just a lecture. So a lot I had to pull back.
Right. You might see shadows walking around here. I live in a house with other people who are trying hard to stay out of camera range.
You might hear my dogs barking. I've got two Bichon. I've got two boys. One of my boys is working right now. My 16-year-old has a job. He loves to work. He works at the grocery store. But I've got two Bichon Frises that bark. One of them is in the book. Ava is in the book, and
Okay.
my readers have demanded that Ava the Bichon reappear in book 2, and so I do plan to bring Ava back. So,
And
and
do you
go
find
ahead.
that interesting that your readers are so invested in your characters that they're telling you what they want to see happen next?
I'm just so thrilled that the readers, yeah, that they are, they're not ordering me. It's not like that Stephen King book where they're telling me, you will write this, or I'll break your leg. But they are really invested. They're really sweet. I love all of my readers. If you're out there, I want to let you know that I'm just so honored that you guys have read the book and are enjoying it. And I get photos of it, I get fan art, and I'm just it really touches my heart.
Yeah, yeah. I know that with Cash, well, in both books, Murder on the Red River and in Girl Gone Missing, there's this character, Long Braids. And so many, especially Native women, are like, well, are they going to get married? Are they going to, and it's like, like I keep thinking that I'm going to have to send them to prison or kill them off. Because if they got married, it would just sort of like, there's the end of the series. And I have a college professor who every time she sees me, she says, "Is Cash still drinking?" Like she's never going to be able to finish school if she keeps drinking like that. And it's like, she's not real. Like,
Oh, that's hilarious. Doesn't she smoke a lot? I seem to recall. It's been a few months since I read this. She smokes,
right,
right?
right. And I think, like your story is present day, and my story is set like in 1970. And the truth
Oh,
of the
that's right.
matter is that in 1970, if you went to the doctor's office and you would light up a cigarette, the doctor would light up a cigarette, push the ashtray across to you. I mean, that's how common smoking was back then. So it's not unusual given the time, the time of the story. Um, but yeah, she does smoke a lot.
So Virgil does in my book as well. I made him a smoker, and I don't smoke myself, and so I had to kind of just rely upon, friends that telling me what it's like to smoke. But
Mhm.
I want to come back and say, Marcie, that your book was so urgent and it felt so vibrant. I had forgotten that it was set in the 70s. I mean, in my head, it was like real time. Not that there's anything wrong with setting it in the 70s. I'm just saying it was written with such urgency and immediacy that I
Mhm.
just plain forgot. I read it in February, and I
Okay.
forgot that it was set in the 1970s. So anyway, cool.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I spent time at Pine Ridge. I think the only time that I was ever at Rosebud, I went one time to Sundance at Crow Dogs. Um, oh no, I was there another time because a friend of mine, she wrote a book about a children's book, and I actually think that the title is Children of the Lakota or something. It's a picture book. Um, and so we visited a family on Rosebud. But those are my only two times that I've actually been to Rosebud. But the descriptions of the people and the community and the way that people um, live and interact was so real that I felt like I was like I could smell the air, and it's so dry in South Dakota that even on Rosebud, which they say, oh well, it's so green. Well, it's not green compared to Minnesota, but
Uh,
um, yeah, it was just right there.
well, that's so kind of you to say. I have heard from a number of people on my reservation, and they've said that that I did a wonderful job of depicting it. And I just heard from my cousin who's still up there, and he gave it to his friend of his. And he's like, I knew every character in this book. He thought that I based every person on the res on somebody, which I didn't.
Yep.
And by the way, that's interesting that you have been to Crow Dogs Sundance because we go every year up until this year. So
Oh,
for folks who are watching, Sundance is for a number of Plains tribes our most sacred ceremony, and And so I take my children every August, and we attend at this famous medicine man Leonard Crow Dog at his Sundance.
Ah, nice.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I know we were supposed to ask, Nicole, if you're still there. I know there was at least one or two questions that you that had been specifically that you wanted to ask me or ask us. And so if you're still hanging in there, we wanted to give you a chance, because I know especially the one about Lakota justice. Oh, hey there. You can
Hi,
pop in.
I'm happy to pop in. Yeah, you talk in Winter Counts about the concept of Lakota justice as different, just being a different way of approaching it than the way that American culture generally approaches it. So I wanted to that was a question we thought would be of interest to readers, and there's such a theme of justice in the book, and you were talking about the vigilante themes within it as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. So I think about this a lot. So I am an attorney, although I don't actually practice anymore. I do donate some time to some Native legal organizations here in Colorado. I worked for 4 years for free, uh, working for something called the Denver Indian Family Resource Center on their board of directors. We are an organization that enforces ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act. So Native kids can't be adopted out and stolen the way they once were. So there are a specific set of procedures that have to be followed when a Native child is taken from its family and fostered or adopted out. So I've done that legally. So but I don't practice for money anymore. So I think a lot about justice, the American European style justice versus indigenous justice. And so, yeah, I was asked to, sort of talk about this before we started tonight. And so, without going on for hours and hours and sounding like a professor, that I'll just kind of summarize it. So European justice is based upon the concept of retribution and sanctions. So it's based on, we have to punish someone and hurt them in order to get justice. Okay, so that's a very simplified way. That's American or European justice. Now, traditional indigenous justice did not operate on the principle of retribution. It operated on the principle of reparations, trying to make people whole again. And so that's not to say that there wasn't some degree of punishment, but it wasn't made central. Okay, and so the traditional indigenous justice. Now again, I'm talking back in the day. It didn't involve, again, locking people up. It was more about trying to keep the harmony of the community strong. So the community always came first. And so one of my ancestors is Chief Spotted Tail, who's the great leader of our nation. So there's a sort of a good illustration. I'll try and keep this short. So Spotted Tail was murdered. He was the leader of our nation in the mid 1800s. He was murdered by another Lakota man, Crow Dog, in fact. And so Crow Dog admitted to killing Spotted Tail for whatever reason. So the elders of our nation got together and they said, okay, Crow Dog, we're going to banish you from the town. So you can't live with the people anymore. And you must provide food, clothing, and a horse to the family of Spotted Tail. You must care for them as if they are your own for the rest of your days. And in that way, the community was, brought together. So reparations, restitution rather than harm. And so that was fine. But the Americans didn't like this. The Americans loved Spotted Tail. He was their favorite native leader, and they hated that Crow Dog had killed him. So they stormed into the camp and they arrested Crow Dog and tried him for murder. Because they thought that our way of justice was too soft. So they tried him for murder, and he was found guilty and he was sentenced to death. And he's like, okay, that's fine. I did kill him. He got an attorney though, and it went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in the case In re Crow Dog, the US Supreme Court said that Native nations are sovereign and they should, in this area anyway, they should have the right to decide their own matters. So Crow Dog was released and he was set free because of the US Supreme Court. Now, what happened next is the Congress was infuriated by this case and they passed the Major Crimes Act, which is the law that forbids Native nations from punishing felonies on their own lands. As a result of traditional Native justice being offensive to the Americans, a law was passed so that we can no longer deal with crimes in our own way. So again, I'll wrap this up here. It all comes back to more of an emphasis on restitution rather than sanctions. So.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, when you started out and you talked about working for the Indian Child Welfare Act and that whole decision, I mean, in the Cash books, Cash was, before 1970, and she was taken and placed in white foster homes. And that becomes a whole backstory for the Cash Black Bear series, which I wasn't even thinking about when I was writing the books. I was just writing the story. But there were here in Minnesota from the Red Lake Reservation, they estimate that 60% of the children were taken from their families prior to 1960. And then from my reservation, they don't have accurate numbers, but they think somewhere between 40 and 60 were removed and placed in white foster homes. And then something like apparently thousands from the Navajo reservation were taken by the Normans and, raised by the Normans, but they were basically used as farm labor. And prior to non-Native people coming to this continent, we didn't have orphanages. We didn't have foster care systems. It was the grandparents and it was the aunties and uncles who, all share. It was the community that shared in the responsibility of raising the children. So somebody didn't end up being taken or removed or sent someplace else. And so it's a whole other system of child rearing and being family in the same way that there was this whole other understanding of legalness, what's right, what's wrong, and how to handle those kinds of situations.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Marcie. And that really resonated with me. Again, if folks are watching this and you're not aware, it was a real scandal. It's a shame of this nation that some large percentage of Native children, we don't know what it was, 30, 40, 60%, were often just taken from their parents without consent because of a variety of reasons. Maybe they wanted labor, maybe there was a childless family that wanted a baby. It was just horrifying. And so thus was passed the Indian Child Welfare Act that tried to stop this practice. Now, that law is under attack, and it's probably going to go to the US Supreme Court in about 3 or 4 years, and we don't know what's going to happen. And then related to that is the boarding schools. So for those students, those children that weren't taken, they were often taken by a different set of agents and shipped off to these boarding schools away from the reservation or sometimes on the reservation, where they were often abused. They weren't allowed to practice their spirituality or speak their language. My own grandmother was a student was enrolled at the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, which is the most infamous of all of these. And we believe that as many as 30% of Native kids were taken without consent from their parents and shipped off to these boarding schools. And that's yet another really horrifying thing that I find students don't know about. They aren't aware that we did this terrible thing. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
We're just writing easy crimes. We're not writing about these big old crimes. we're writing about, like somebody beating somebody up or somebody killing somebody, not like whole nations being killed off, packed or ripped apart,
Yeah. So, look, the point here is, you can read our stories and be entertained. but but maybe you'll learn about the indigenous worldview, or maybe you'll learn a little history or politics. But again, I'm sure you and I would agree, Marcie, the story always comes first. If
Yeah,
people don't want to read a book, they're going to put it down. So I've always put the story and the characters first. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. And in some ways, they're, you know, the this I think the stories that we've written, and like me reading your story, it's easier on my heart than some of these bigger, harder stories that we're talking
sure,
about. Yeah,
sure,
kind of the backstory is
agreed.
harder. And so do you have a second? Yours is a series also?
I do. So I'm happy to announce that there is a sequel to Winter Counts. It's tentatively titled Wounded Horse. That title may change. I'm
Okay.
trying to work on it now. I'm still busy, promoting the book and all that. And so I am writing. I've got the outline of the book, so there will be another book. That's 100% certain because I have a contract with HarperCollins. So there will be another book in the Virgil Wounded Horse series. Beyond that, I can't say. I should also mention, I'm thrilled to announce, I think this is the first time I've publicly announced it, but I've written a short story with Virgil, Wounded Horse, and Tommy from the book. I just
Okay.
finished that a few days ago. It will appear in an anthology of short stories called Midnight Hour, and it's being published by Crooked Lane Books, and it will appear in February 2021. So it's
Nice.
not that far off. So there is another Virgil story on the way, but the larger book is coming. I promise.
I
And
think
so you've already said you're working on 3.
yeah, I am. Well, 3 is needs editing, and then I've begun 4. Um so I think there was a question too that was going to be asked about the writing process. Am I correct about that? Like, what's your writing process?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about the writing process. And I think before, one of the questions that was asked is, what was the easiest part of the story for me to write, and what was the most difficult, and what is my writing process? I'm happy to talk about that a little bit. So my writing process is, I've got 2 kids, and I've got a job, and I also teach at so in addition to my university job that I teach during the day, I teach one night a week at a Master of Fine Arts creative writing program. And so I teach the students, it's called a low residency program. So I teach writing students as well. So I'm busy. So the only time I really get to myself is 4 a.m., 4 or 5 a.m. So I call it the 5 a.m. writing club. I get up, I brew some good strong coffee, and I get 2 hours to myself, and so that's really my primary writing time.
Mm,
And
wow.
so yeah, ahead of time I was asked, and I'll throw this one to you, when I'm done, Marcie. Um, what was the most difficult part to write, and what was the easiest part to write in Winter Counts? Without a doubt, and I've mentioned this before in some of my appearances, the hardest part of the book for me to write were the scenes with Nathan. Nathan is the 14-year-old that is being raised by Virgil Wounded Horse as his own. His Virgil's sister has died tragically, so he is the legal guardian of his nephew Nathan. And I had to bring in a lot of my own experience as a parent to write those. And Nathan goes through a very traumatic experience in the book. I had to draw upon some of my own experiences with my younger child. It's not a secret. I've mentioned this before, but my youngest son Sasha, about a year and a half ago, was in a school, and there was a school shooting. 2 gunmen burst in and started shooting, and they killed a young man. And so my son had to cower in a closet with his
Mm,
classmates and listen to the gunshots. And I didn't know if he was alive or dead. It was a terrible thing. I've written an article about this, but nobody wants to publish it yet. It's too depressing. And so
right.
um, I had to, I had to tap upon those experiences. When I wrote the section about Nathan, where he may live or die, I had to bring back the memories of what it was like for my son because for 5 hours, I just knew that there had been multiple fatalities at his school. I couldn't reach my son on his phone. So it was every parent's nightmare, really. And I had to tap into that. That was no fun to write, that scene. On a happier note, the fun scenes for me to write, I have a character in there called Tommy, who is sort of the comic relief in the book. He's sort of the silly, crazy, funny guy, and I just always loved writing him. It was just a pleasure to write this happy, crazy, wonderful guy. So those were a joy to write. So anyway, I'll throw it to you. What did you find any part of the first two books particularly hard or easier?
No.
Okay. Cool.
No, what I as you see, I live in this house with more than just me, and so there's always the struggle to find the time to write. And so and a lot of my writing is happening in my head. So I think, like, while I'm doing dishes, while I'm running somebody here, while I'm dealing with this, I'm writing, working the story through in my head, so that when I actually sit down, it's like, it just like boom, 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 as fast as I can get it out on the keyboard. And when I do my best writing is when I can get a writing retreat. I can go someplace and I can just be totally isolated and just crank out, page after page. But I also think that because of the way that I write, I don't seem to, at least so far, I haven't had difficulty. And maybe that, again, because I'm editing things out in my head or rewriting in my head, so that when I do sit down, it's just sort of like, there it is. With book 3, there was one point where I was writing, and I quit writing, went to bed, got up the next day, and thought, this needs to go. Because what I realized I was doing was I was writing to an audience as opposed to just writing the story.
Yeah.
So I went back and I just threw that out, and started over again from where I needed to.
Nice.
Because that was just like a dumb thing to do in the writing. But yeah.
I can really relate to that. Having kids, living with folks, it's wonderful. I love family and all that. But I had the good fortune to go to 2 different writing retreats where I wrote the final third of Winter Counts, and then I went to another one where I edited the entire book. And just to have the luxury of a month to myself, again, I love my kids, okay, I love them, but a month to just sit down and write and think about things, it was really invaluable. So I hear that completely.
So I have another question. Like, as a native guy, did you think you were going to grow up and write books?
No. I'm a first generation college student. Neither one of my parents graduated from college. I grew up in fairly tough circumstances, and we didn't have always enough to eat and that. And I love to read always, but I just didn't really understand how one became a writer. I just didn't understand that. It wasn't in my frame of reference. And so I started writing later in life. I did go to college. My parents scrimped and saved. I had to take out massive student loans. I went to the state university. And so, when you grow up kind of poor, you often make career decisions that, you don't want to struggle financially. So I became a lawyer. And so I went to school for that. I discovered that really wasn't my path. And so then, when my kids were little, after they were past the baby stage, I was like, well, wait a minute, maybe I can try this writing thing. So no, I never had a thought that I would be a writer growing up. It just wasn't in my wheelhouse. So yeah, this just been like a real bonus to me later in life. How about you? Did you think
Same
that
thing.
early on?
I mean, I've written since I learned how to write, but I didn't know that as a Native woman I could grow up and be a writer. I just didn't know it. Um, and I guess it's one of the things that I want to say. If there's any Native people out there, and if you want to write, write. If you want to get up on stage, get up on stage. If you want to rap, do poetry, what like I think that like this being Native, being Indian, there it's not because people want to limit us, not because our people want to limit us, but because we just haven't known that we could do any of these things, I think. And so I really want to encourage, and not just younger people, but middle-aged people, older people, if there's something that you want to do, just go for it. Um, and I think that now really is the time for, especially for Native writers, to try to get your stuff out there, submit. Yellow Medicine Review, some of these places that will take unagented submissions, or but for people to just put their work out there. Because I mean, I was going to be a lawyer too, and
Oh,
it was like, no, I ain't ever sitting in a classroom that long again.
hey Nicole, I see Nicole's back.
Hi. Yeah, your discussion about just sort of not necessarily seeing people from your background as authors, not knowing that you as a Native person, that was a path that you could follow. One of the just kind of building on that, I think we definitely have some writers in the audience tonight. Did either of you have problems finding agents or publishers because you're telling Native stories, or was that kind of your thought? That's a question we've gotten tonight.
I can start with that, Marcie, and then you and I have talked about this in off screen before. I pursued my writing at a writing school called the Institute of American Indian Arts. It is a writing program that is specifically for Native students, and it has Native instructors. And it's a fairly new writing program. It started in 2013. And so I studied creative writing at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And because of a friend of mine, Tommy Orange, I'm sure everybody knows who he is. He did so well with his book. I didn't have a problem finding an agent or a publisher, to be perfectly honest. And I attribute a lot of this to Tommy. Thank you, Tommy. Okay, because he was just so wildly successful that I think a lot of doors opened. So no, I did not, but it can be, I know, a very difficult process. My girlfriend is a Native writer, and she's looking for an agent right now. Her name is Erica Worth. But Marcie, I'll turn it over to you. So
hint, hint. So when I wrote my book and spent 5 years trying to get an agent, trying to find a publisher, rejection after rejection after rejection. And I was just giving up. And I was talking to Debbie Reese. And again, everybody should know who Debbie Reese is. She writes a blog about American Indians and children's literature. And she's the one that said to me, why don't you try Cinco Puntos? And she said, what is she? She said, I heard that they've published some Native authors. And so I said, sent them an email, had a phone call with Lee Bird, and sent the manuscript. They sent me a contract. I'm currently working now to get an agent. I think that back when I was first submitting Murder on the Red River, it was before this time of we need diverse books, our own voices, and the Native books that were being published were the romance novels with the woman on the cover, she falls in love with the half-breed, and it's like, that's not Murder on the Red River. The other person who was, helpful to me was Linda Rodriguez, who is also from the Southwest, and she writes mysteries. And she was just really encouraging of me to just keep trying. So yeah, I don't have an MFA in writing. I haven't, I came close to failing English or poetry, whatever it was, when I was in college. It was just like, I don't write what people expect to be written, I guess.
Which is what makes it exciting to not expect what's there. I have some other writing process questions too. On a technical end, do you write old-fashioned with pen and paper? Do you use a laptop or mobile device? Our listeners want to know.
You want to take this one, Marcie, first?
Keyboard, on my laptop or my computer. I haven't tried it yet, but I am interested in the artificial intelligence thing where you speak it and then it writes it out for you. But I haven't tried it yet, but I'm going to, because I've heard it increases your word count. What about you, David?
I old-fashioned too. I do just a laptop. I've got a cheap laptop. It's on its last legs, and so I'm too lazy to write things out, and I have too bad a handwriting. So yeah, I write on the keyboard every day, and then the next day when I get up, I edit what I've done the day before because it's fresh in my mind. So that's my process. No, you don't do that? You're looking like I'm crazy. That's just what I do. So
that's good. That's good. That's a good habit. I just write it all out, and then I have to go back and edit. Yeah. Was there another writing question, Nicole?
Both of you mentioned earlier just different authors who sort of have supported you in getting published and helping you find your path forward. Marcie, I believe that you have do some work around mentoring, is my understanding, and I just wanted to ask about just kind of like your relationship in the writing community with sort of being supported and supporting.
So my mentor primarily was Jim Northrup, who passed a couple years ago, and he was the one who just encouraged me. He just said, keep writing, and every time I talked to him, he'd say, well, what are you working on? What are you working on? So like my job is writing. That's what I do for a living. That's how I paid my mortgage, the car. Like if you ask my kids, am I making a living? They're like, ha, 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 but it works for me. But a piece of that is really trying to advocate and support Native artists, other artists, whether that's writers, poets, people who want to get on stage. It's like there really are opportunities out there for people. And oftentimes people just need a little push. They just need to be told, you can do this. We can do this. We belong everywhere as Native people. And I don't have, I'm not going to say what I was going to say. I think it's really important that we support each other, we back each other, we share ideas, share resource. There's not a shortage of resource out there. That's what a capitalist society would want us to think, that there's not enough for everybody, but there really is. And there are so many stories that as Native people for us to tell. Yeah.
Well, I'll jump in. Marcie, I'll tell you that I had the fortune about 8 years ago of working with Jim Northrup just for a day. He ran a writing retreat and such a kind, wonderful man. I really liked him. So I just wanted to mention that. My mentors, if they'd probably be horrified to hear themselves called that, but I worked with a few folks at the Institute of American Indian Arts who've now moved on. I worked with a faculty member. She's not Native, but she was great. Her name is Ramona Osabel. She's still a faculty member there, and she was great to me. And then I worked a lot at a writing conference called Tin House with a gentleman called Benjamin Percy,
Mm.
and he's great, and he really helped me on the writing. More than that, he's kind of helped me with what comes after the writing. You know, how do you handle yourself as an author? You know, what do you do? And he and I still stay in contact. He's one of the class acts in the writing business. And anybody watching, please go read Benjamin Percy's books. And for those of you who are writers, for my MFA students, I assign his craft book called Thrill Me. It is fantastic. I vouch for it. Okay, it is a wonderful craft book. I guarantee you that you will get some lessons on writing out of it. Benjamin Percy, Thrill Me. On the other end of it, I take very seriously my responsibility to try and lift up emerging Native writers. I was a mentor for the Association of Writers and Writing Programs in their mentorship program, and I mentored an emerging Native writer. I helped her out with her stuff. I'm continuing to mentor young, up-and-coming Native writers and non-Native writers as well. I just last week or a couple of weeks ago, a young man contacted me. His name is Shane Hawk. He has a great collection of Indigenous horror stories called
Uh-huh.
Anoka, self-published on Amazon.
Yeah.
And he's great. And it's a pleasure, to help those, that are coming up. So I take that really seriously. So thank you for the wonderful question.
I'm going to ask a question that we've got that's really specific to winter counts. When Virgil and Marie go to Denver, they encountered a group of women who identify themselves as Sioux versus Lakota, and the participant wants to know why that is, why you set up that interaction in that way.
Yeah, so there were a couple of things in that scene. Thank you, first of all. Thank you, whoever submitted that question. I really appreciate it. That was a fun scene to write. I live in Denver, so I was really thrilled to have some chapters in the book take part in Denver. I love Denver. It's my hometown, but it's changing. And so I kind of wanted to comment upon how Denver is gentrifying and changing. But I also wanted to bring in some language stuff. We Lakota people generally do not use the word Sioux. Sioux is a word that means little snakes. It was given to us by another tribe. And so it's not something that we tend to use ourselves. But in that scene, the Marie code switches. So that she can communicate with these non-Native women, she calls herself Sioux because often folks don't know what Lakota is. And so I kind of wanted to illustrate in a very brief scene there just the sort of duality that people of color have to maintain. We talk one way amongst ourselves and we have the references, but then in other parts of society, we change the way that we speak. I mean, I suppose everybody does this, but it's very acute, I think, for people of color. So that's probably more than the reader or the viewer wanted to know, but thank you for the question.
Someone wanted to repeat on the name of the author that you shouted out who has this horror story collection. And I'm going to write it down too. So
Shane Hawk, so Hawk, and it is called Anoka, Anoka. I just bought the book. It's short. It's like $5. It's 6 stories on Amazon. They are, horror stories. They're pretty graphic, but I tell you, this young man has a real talent for writing, and I didn't know anything about him, but he just pops up on social media, and it's some fun stuff. But there are lots of other emerging Native writers that I want to point out as well. Now, he's not really emerging, but my friend Brandon Hobson was nominated for the National Book Award a year ago. He's got a book coming out. I just wrote a blurb for it. It's called The Removed. It's coming out from Echo. It's fantastic. Another friend of mine is called Kelly Jo Ford. She has a wonderful book out called Crooked Hallelujah. Folks, if you don't know that, that's a great one to get. My buddy Stephen Graham Jones has a great book out called The Only Good Indians. There is very much, I think, this sort of opening, this reopening, flowering, if you will, of Native voices. And so it's just a wonderful time, I think, to be a Native artist.
See. And we're at 7:30, so I want to be respectful of both of your evenings, your time. I know it's later for you in the Midwest, or in the more Midwest than we are. Thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to share your stories with us, to talk about the craft, to talk about your work. We all really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much. I know I am getting lots of nice comments back regarding appreciation for the conversation tonight. So thank you both.
And I want to thank Marcie for agreeing to join me. Marcie, you know, I've read your work and admired you for a long time. Thank you so much. It's the first time you and I have been able to have a non-computer conversation, so I'm really thrilled. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you to all of the organizers of this and all of the readers that have read and supported Winter Counts. I just want to say thank you so much. So it's really been my pleasure.
Ditto, ditto, ditto. Thank you much.
Thank you again for joining us, everyone, and I hope that you have a wonderful evening. You can keep track of Glendale Library Arts and Cultures programming at eglendalelac.org, and you'll see more information about Be the Change, our speakers event series that this is a part of there as well. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.